Hello to you all, and a welcome to the first official instalment of the PitCast by us here at the Pit Crew Online, from the fans, for the fans. Now, if you heard our introductory episode and have chosen to come back for this, we thank you and hope that you enjoyed this instalment. Let's bring you all up to speed with the crew members today. There is, of course, me. My name is Luca. And joining me today from the introductory episode, we have our deputy editor again. It's James.
Hi, thanks, Luca. It's a pleasure to be back again and talking about motorsport.
Indeed it is. Oh, and now, alongside James and myself, we are joined by our boss, the de facto leader of the Pit Crew Online, the crew chief himself. Do give a warm welcome to editor-in-chief and the only remaining founder of the Pit Crew Online, Simon.
Hi there.
Yeah, sorry to have to do this to you, Simon, but could you give some background to our listeners about yourself?
Sure. So, as Lucas said, I'm one of the founders of the Pit Crew Online. We started, I believe, in 2013 as a very small basic site for a group of writers who basically did their own blogs. I wrote for another organisation. We wanted to really just concentrate on motorsport rather than the other sites we all wrote for or blogs were based on other sports as well. So it just really grew from there. As it's grown, we've grown in numbers, we've grown in websites. We started, as I said, we started on a basic site, and now we're fully supported by Taurus, our IT guy. We have Julia, who does all our PA work. I think that's probably about all I've got to say about myself. It's really about everyone else and trying to get writers noticed and get them into paid jobs. I mean, that's all that we really get out of it.
Yep, indeed. I mean, when I volunteered back in March, I knew I wasn't going to get paid, but I don't mind. The fact that you provide a platform for us lot, we really appreciate the opportunities that are going to come out of it, Simon. So thank you.
It's exactly that. It's a platform for mainly young writers to get their work out there, to get seen, and as I said, hopefully get paid employment in the future. We've been successful with a couple of writers in the past. A couple have gone on to Dorma. One's gone to work for a national magazine in India. So we have had some success, and hopefully we'll have lots more in the future.
Don't count on me for that one. Anyway. All right, everybody. So in this instalment of the PitCast, we are talking about the resumption of real-life racing, specifically in regard to a lot of major big motorsport categories like Formula One and MotoGP. And just to fill you all in, of course, we all know what it is, but the motorsport world has been a bit of at a standstill due to the ongoing pandemic, but we look to soon be getting back up and running again. In the last few days, F1 have indeed confirmed their first 8 races, with 2 races in Austria back-to-back, followed by the Hungarian GP in the first 3 weeks of July. A 1-week break followed by 3 successive races, 2 at Silverstone, followed by the Spanish Grand Prix. Then 2 weeks later, back-to-back rounds at Spa and Monza. If any more race dates have been confirmed, whether that be in F1 or many other championships, we most likely are recording this before any of that has been confirmed. So, gentlemen, on to the task at hand. We're going to there's a lot of questions to come out of this current situation. I want to start with you, James. So motorsport as a whole obviously had to come to a standstill, mainly because you have so many people involved, and that it just couldn't keep going with the ongoing dangers that came with COVID. Unfortunately, it sucked, and ever since the Australian Grand Prix, we have been able to enjoy like the esports side. I know I have per se, but when it comes to real life racing, this is something that I think a lot of people really need it in a way. Don't you agree?
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's been great having all of the esports championships that have been going at the moment. I must confess, I've not fully been able to get into esports as much as a lot of other people have. So I'm currently chomping at the bit to, watch some real racing again, but equally, like, only as long as it's safe. That's the important thing, of course.
Of course. I mean, what are the plans for the supposedly they're trying to limit the number of personnel who are going to be attending motorsport events. There's going to be no crowds, apparently. That's going to be really surreal. F1 having no crowds, most of the junior categories. Oh, is this your first time? Like, because you never see many crowds at like a Formula 4 race, for example. But then there's a lot of like ethical questions about this as well. Like, is it a good idea? Like, I have my older brother Robert. He recently had a kid with his girlfriend, and my brother's girlfriend actually made a point of why should motorsport get, indeed any sport, or get priority over someone who's just trying to get by?
I mean, it is tricky because it's like, even if you have the races behind closed doors and don't have the fans at the circuit, you have still got hundreds of personnel, even with like limited race teams and things, just with the kind of the hospitality staff, the media staff, the camera crews that do the TV feeds. So it's going to be a monster operation to try and trim down just to run one Grand Prix. And they've put in some good solutions, like with the back-to-back rounds in Austria and Silverstone, to try and reduce travel, try and reduce the impact of the Formula One circus moving around the world. I really don't envy the work they've got to do at the moment to make this sport safe and get it going again.
Yeah, it's an absolute Herculean task, isn't it?
And because it's such an evolving situation as well. I mean, it's like we saw with the Australian Grand Prix, they thought that was going to be fine to go ahead, and then literally about an hour before first practice, wasn't it, that it was called off?
Apparently it was like 3 a.m. for them.
Yeah, I remember being up, like, obviously I was here in the UK, we were going to be commentating on FP1 that morning, and being up at whatever time it was, about kind of 12:30, just after midnight, and just going through Twitter, seeing people who were like journalists at the site and saying things like, we don't know if it's going to go ahead. So I can understand, that it's such a difficult thing when you've got to make these calls like so far in advance, but with the situation changing every single day and even hour by hour sometimes. It's going to take a lot to make it safe, but they seem to have put in a lot of work to get that done. The fact that they've had to lose quite a few rounds just throughout sort of March, April, May and June as well proves they're taking it seriously.
Yeah, I'm glad about that. Simon, I'm going to just you mentioned off air what races do you think they're going to be having, and I did see something, I can't remember how many weeks ago now, about F1 planning on essentially trying to streamline their calendar. So we've got the first 8 races, they're all in Europe at the moment, and apparently what they're planning on doing is to limit as much travel as possible, is having the Eurasian rounds after Monza, so that's like Baku and Sochi, which is like roughly on the European-Asian border, then going to Asia, then the Americas, and then flying back over to the Middle East races. And I'm just at a point now where I'm really struggling to think, is that even going to be possible? Like the fact that they're planning on structuring the calendar like that to get roughly about 15 or more races.
It's going to be crazy. I mean, Baku is literally in the middle of nowhere. I don't know what if any coronavirus measures they have out there. I'm sure the teams and the FIA will be on top of that. Asia's been, the epicenter of coronavirus, and they're talking about going back to China. I read this morning. I'm not sure if you look at it from not so much as a crew member working for a team, but if your husband, wife, son, daughter worked for one of those teams, and you knew they were going to go out to these countries and possibly put them and their families at risk, how does that work? It's a minefield.
Well, don't we have like a member of our team actually as someone who anonymously contributes and whilst they work in the F1 paddock?
Yeah, we do.
The pit crew spy.
Yeah, cannot disclose the name or the team.
Of course, I don't even know who it is really. But even if I did, I would keep my mouth shut.
There was more than one at one stage, and it was an account that we set up for staff to anonymously post information or put stuff on that they knew, and I think it's literally probably one or two now that actually do it, and it's very seldom I tend to jump on the account to retweet stuff from our main feed. But one in particular, one guy I know, they are back at work. They have got social distancing measures. I'd love to mention the team, but it would be a huge giveaway. And
Don't worry about it.
try not to slip with that one. Nearly did. But yeah, I mean, he's very up for going for it. I know his family and they're supportive, but understandably apprehensive. One of the things that they're apprehensive about is not so much being there, being at the racetrack, but getting on an aeroplane. So the European leg, that's going to be fine from what it will be road transport. But if they go outside Europe and they've got to get on a plane, you're trapped on a plane with how many other individuals? They recirculate the air, I assume. I don't know, but I assume that's how it works. They're talking about air bridges and 14-day quarantines when they get back to the UK. So how would that work? I mean, some of the bigger teams will have the staff to manage that. Some of the teams, we all know that Williams are struggling. Will they be able to afford to have, their whole race team take 14 days off when they fly back to the UK and someone else take over?
Yeah, that is actually something. Sorry, do you want to say something, James?
Oh yeah, I was just going to say, just adding on that, like Mercedes and Ferrari and Red Bull have, like Simon said, they have the staff to be able to do that. But a team like Haas and Racing Point and Williams, their numbers are limited. So yeah, when F1's trying to pack in a schedule as tight as it is this year, trying to still get 15 to 18 races in about half a year, there isn't really the time to have, say, 2 weeks layover in between those. Teams have got to have multiple crews that they can send out. And that is going to be very, very tough on the smaller teams, just to have those numbers there and available.
Can I ask you guys, what you think is a minimum number of races that would constitute a meaningful world championship?
Oh, it's a good question. Because I know in the rules, strictly, it has to be 8 races on 3 different continents. But
we've got the one continent so far.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point as well. Like if, at the moment, the American rounds are obviously the US, Mexico and Brazil. And currently the US and Brazil have the 2 highest numbers of confirmed cases in the world. So if with the situation going as it is, those races might be in jeopardy by the time they come around. And I don't know what F1 does if it gets to that point where it's, it's going to the end of the season and it can't run, say, the American rounds, the American and the Latin American rounds. How does it get around that rule that it's not classed as a world championship if it's not made it to 3 continents? It's not going to Melbourne now, so that won't count. You won't be able to get a continent there. Whether they'll have to bend the rule a little bit.
I wouldn't be surprised if it was safer to go back to somewhere like Australia. If Australia could pull it off, even another one of the.
A round at Phillip Island or Bathurst instead of Melbourne. That would be sick.
I've seen Red Bull their cars around Bathurst, or was it someone else?
McLaren, I think.
Yeah, McLaren.
Some big anniversary for Bathurst, and they drove the Formula 1 car there. But
I do actually want to bring up, World Touring Cars did release a schedule, and they have had rounds in like the Asia region, Europe. They've had some in America. This season has been quite shortened in terms. I think it starts in like August, and they are only doing Europe, even though it's called World Touring Cars.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
I also want to go back to your point. I don't know. I forget who it was who said it, but about how the teams are really going to be able to function. The fact is that the first 6 races are held in a 7-week period, and there are some concerns as to whether they're actually going to have the spare parts and the money for a lot of the smaller teams. So if like you crash at one of the rounds, you might actually put your entire season in jeopardy.
That's a good point, especially if it's when the rounds are so tightly packed together, just being able to get the logistics of it in, because normally teams will send their freight to one race and they'll already have freight moving to another race later in the calendar. But with the season so tightly packed and with finances on obviously not in their healthiest, given the situation. That is going to be a concern, I imagine, for a lot of the smaller teams.
We don't know.
Sorry, Simon.
We don't know what other countries' quarantine rules are. We know that in the UK they want to install a 14-day quarantine period when you fly back into the country. But countries that we're hoping to fly to, obviously, I'm guessing that they wouldn't have given us this provisional calendar without checking with these countries that they can fly their staff in and out safely. But anywhere else, I'm going to guess, especially someone like Brazil or the US, they're going to have something like this. They're going to have that 14-day. Brazil, I mean, the numbers are frightening, as they are in the US, and everything else going on in the US. Would you even try to negotiate for a race there at the moment? Although
it becomes an interesting ethical question, I think, as well. Like with if a country's government allows F1 to hold a race, I wonder if F1 will have to make a decision whether it is responsible for them to bring it there, even if they're allowed to by local legislation. Like you said, for example, the US or Brazil with the cases, or Russia, for example, with the cases as high as they are. If the countries say, yes, it's fine to come, does F1 have to make that decision of, we're not sure whether we should go with the numbers still as they are, or will they say, if the government's saying it's allowed, then it's fine?
Unfortunately, F1 follows the money. You know, they're prepared to race in countries with diabolical human rights records.
China, Russia, yep.
Yeah, China. It doesn't seem to bother them. So if the money's there, they'll race.
I know they did put in quite a lot with the Austrian Grand Prix. They put in a lot of in negotiations with the Austrian Health Ministry to make sure they could I think it was even like just to make sure they could have one Grand Prix without impacting the local health services, let alone two. So there is work going on in the background, but yeah, there is that question of, they've also got to have this number of races. They've got to have it for the money for the teams to still be going.
Can I make ask a question to Simon? Obviously, you know who Pit Crew Spy is. Sorry, I keep bringing them up. What do the teams have to do to ensure that they are exempt from certain quarantine restrictions in regards to, they don't travel to a country and infect some? They have to sort of keep themselves essentially in like a bubble, don't they? I'm
guessing so. I know they've been tested, or this particular guy's been tested. So he was good to go. I think that you get a pack in the NHS. A courier comes around to your house, takes the package, and disappears. I mean, James probably knows more about that than I did, because he's unfortunately had it. But I don't think it's any different measures from any other form of business, from what I gather. It's just that they're putting, by flying out to races, whatever race it is, they're putting themselves at greater risk, because they're going to have to they can't stay 2 meters away from each other, can they? In a small garage.
Working around an F1 car that's not that big anyway.
The factory back home, I'm sure they've got measures they can manage it. It's a management situation. When you're in a race situation at a foreign Grand Prix in a small garage, I just don't see it's manageable. How is the pit wall going to work? Are we going to have one guy at one end and one guy at the other, and no one in the middle?
And sorry, can I just say something? Apparently, from what I've heard, they're planning on, obviously limiting every team to have a set number of personnel per race, but also apparently they will all be kept in a bubble from each other. So if someone from AlphaTauri tries to interact with someone from Racing Point, they are kept quite far apart. But yeah, apparently, as long as they are all within their teams and have all been tested, and when they're outside of the team, like maybe at home, for example, I don't know if that's going to be allowed, if people are going to have to keep with their team for 6 months. But as long as they are noticeably distant, I'm guessing, from anyone that would obviously risk putting anyone in danger of contracting the virus, as long as they're doing that, then supposedly they can still stay within their team's quarters. Is that right?
Don't go home to your family. Just stay with the team.
Yeah. That's going to be difficult.
Oh.
Yeah, they spend enough time away from home as it is.
I'm sure there's quite a few young guys with with a few kids that are thinking, yeah, this is a result. I get to say what I have.
Yeah, big yikes on that one.
Yeah.
Can I move on to something? It was something I wanted to bring up. It's the F1 calendar in general. I've noticed in the last few years, I remember one of the initial, I think a German newspaper had brought up this supposed draft calendar for 2020, and there was a point on it that really annoyed me. Obviously, it turned out to be fake, but Daniel Ricciardo once brought up something about how difficult it is that the F1 calendar is structured often the way it is. So, for example, when we go to Spa and Monza, I know they're not the closest to countries anyway, but you don't require a plane to travel from Belgium to Italy. You just drive there within a week. But after Monza, you go to Singapore, which is obviously in like the middle of the Far East of Asia. Then you travel back to Sochi, which is on the most southerly point of European Russia. And then you go to Japan, which is Far East Asia. I've always had such an issue with unnecessary, like when it's Canada, for example, like Canada's right in the middle of the European season, which is inconvenient because you can't really place that along with Mexico and US because that time of year for Montreal, it's probably really too cold. So it's like the one notable exception. But when it comes to things like having, you could really just save on so much air travel if you go from Monza to Sochi to Marina Bay to Suzuka. Like there is so many points. It's not even just F1. MotoGP in I think it was 2011. They had their rounds. They went to Laguna Seca in the middle of the year, and then after Germany, I think, then they went to the Czech Republic, and then went back to America for Indianapolis, and then to Misano. Obviously, in future years, they swapped that round. They noticed their flaw there. But Simon, sorry to throw you under the bus here, but do you think, do you think that motorsport calendars could really use this opportunity to really sort of look into their structure in terms of where they go and how they travel, to really make it as, I don't know, motorsport's not an environmentally friendly sport, like obviously with all the travel and the racing itself, but do you think that the little areas that they can save on, they can use this time now to really analyse what they can do better?
Absolutely. As you said, the environmental theme shouldn't be ignored. The biggest environmental damage caused by Formula One isn't the cars driving around the circuit, it's getting the cars to the circuits on the aeroplanes, the teams there, all of that infrastructure. So when they say Formula E is much greener, it's greener. Obviously the cars are greener and they're looking in the right direction, but they're still flying these cars around the world. So to have those races closer together geographically makes perfect sense. I've often wondered this myself. You know, as you say, you look at the calendar and you think, why? It just doesn't make any sense. It's almost like whoever comes up with the calendar hasn't looked at an atlas and thought, oh, wait a minute, I'm going to make them have to fly. Oh, don't worry. Or they've got shares in the company that transports all this stuff. It has to be one or the other. You know, I can make money out of this. I know. Let's go from Canada back to Europe, or from, you know, Sochi to Japan, or whatever. It's probably not a great example, but you know, you're right. It doesn't make sense, Luca. It's just one of those things that's morphed into something that it never was. We didn't really worry. When I started watching Formula One, no one really cared about the environment. You know, V12 engines, they were flying all over the world, smoking when they got out of the car, having a drink. It was a very, very different world. But we're learning all the time, and we know that the environment is really important. And if by moving those races that are geographically closer together in the calendar, we help save the environment. That even that little bit's got to help.
Yeah, and James, the point, I've raised MotoGP there because in 2011, do you follow MotoGP?
I don't, I'm afraid, no.
Okay, well, in 2011, it was Casey Stoner's penultimate year before he retired, and it was actually his second World Championship. And he was on a run of form. I think it was around that time, I think he had, actually, I could be wrong, but Germany, he won at Laguna, Czech Republic, Indianapolis, but then it came to Misano. He was on pole position, Misano's in Italy, by the way. I don't know if I've mentioned that. And he got third, and he said that he was really jet lagged. And you have got to think, like, obviously the riders / drivers are affected by this, but also the teams, like they're the ones that are constantly working behind the scenes. And could you imagine how straining that is, working at points where you're going from like you're getting so much jet lag, and you probably wake up thinking, oh, it's time to go. Oh wait, no, it's 3 a.m. Like, obviously, I haven't really experienced that much jet lag, but do you think that's also an element that really needs to be addressed?
Yeah, I mean, we as fans complain enough when the season starts. We've got to adjust to Australian time, and then a week or 2 weeks later adjust to time in Bahrain, and then to time in China, and then we get that run of the European season where it's at least for us British viewers, it's more or less the same. Then it's to the Far East and then Americas again. But yeah, with the amount of people that are in a Formula One team that are spending half the year going around the world, that are adjusting to all of these different time zones every other week, and considering the work they do as well, like if any of them are off their game doing something like a pit stop, putting a tyre onto a car, and it makes it unsafe for the drivers, or it makes it unsafe for the people in the garage, then that's a serious concern, and it is something that I think should be looked at. And I know that there are some races, like I know there was some trouble getting Bahrain this year to agree to be penciled in near Abu Dhabi at the end of the year, even though it makes geographical sense, just because they're worried about people in that kind of area thinking, well, if I'm going to go to one Grand Prix, I'll just go to whichever one's closest. Whereas before they might have thought, I'll go to Bahrain at the start of the year and Abu Dhabi at the end of the year. But yeah, like Simon said, it just doesn't make sense sometimes when you look at the calendar, and it's as if they've set the calendar up by alphabetical order rather than by looking at an atlas. They're just kind of gone, yeah, we'll go to Australia first, then Bahrain, then China, get the ABC in. Now they've got the Dutch Grand Prix for D.
Oh my gosh, I never thought of that. Hey, Spain in Spanish is España, so it would be the E.
Exactly, yeah. It doesn't make sense a lot of the time. And yeah, when you think they could go to Singapore and then on to Japan rather than going back to Russia first, and I'm sure there are legal and contractual reasons somewhere in there, but there's got to be a more sensible way of doing it. And yeah, perhaps this year is a good chance for a reset.
Do you think there's too many races, though, generally? I once asked Jean Todt in a press conference, because they'd extended the calendar, do you think it was fair on the staff, not the drivers, but the team staff? And he really ripped into me, saying that these people should be glad to work within Formula One. It's a privilege for them. And I said, it's a privilege for them, but their partners and their kids, it's not much of a privilege. They're off, 9 months of the year all over the world, and they don't get to see daddy or mummy or whatever. But honestly, he ripped me a new one with that.
I have a lot of respect for you for asking him that, or telling him that.
Into it,
I think it's a good point, though. I spoke to Karun Chandok at Autosport International last year and asked him a similar question. And he said that he really wanted the calendar to go back to 18 races, because I think even like just from a fan's point of view, the more races you get, the more spectacle is lost somehow. But if there's a race every weekend, it's no longer as important that you watch it. And especially now that you can just record it when it's on, you don't have to like set up a VCR to watch it. So yeah, and you think, well, if I've missed this race, then there's one next week anyway, so I don't have to like change my plans to miss a race. But if there are fewer races in the year, you're more likely, I think, to arrange your plans around them. I do think I'm interested to see how a shortened season is this year, to be honest. I'm interested to see the effect it has on things like the championship, and then also things like viewership and the general interest around it.
How many races did Lewis win last year?
So many.
2019. Did he win? Was it 9? No, I can't think. Out of 21 races, I can't remember, unfortunately.
I'm doing a quick search now.
End up winning all of those 8 rounds. if Max isn't on it in Austria. Hungary, Great Britain. I think he could easily win those 2 Spa. He could win all those first 8 races.
Yeah, he won 11 last year, so that's more than half the calendar.
Yeah,
A lot of the junior drivers who are on the cusp of getting to F1, and in fact, all of them who want to get their super license points.
Yeah, so it is. I think it's an interesting year for a lot of the junior drivers, especially in F2. With the vacancy at Renault, you've got people like Guan Yu Zhou and Christian Lundgaard in contention for the seat. And then also you've got Mick Schumacher and Robert Schwartzman in there vying for a potential seat at Alfa Romeo. And and with the championship getting up and running, it's possible for them to get their super license points if they're able to complete a championship. But obviously before F1 released its calendar the other day, I was wondering, how much, even if they can get the points to be eligible for F1, were they going to be able to get enough experience if the calendar was shortened? And especially, I think, when you look at someone like Christian Lundgaard, for example, who's making his first jump into F2, would he actually have the experience to be ready to go into a Renault F1 seat if they only managed to get, say, 10 rounds of F2 in? But yeah, when F1 announced its calendar the other day with F2 and F3 being at every single one of the European rounds, I think they're probably putting in a good step to address that, because it's already given them 16 races. And then with F2, they've still got Sochi, Abu Dhabi, Bahrain and Baku that they're planning on fitting back in, which would give them if that can be pulled off, then that would give them a great calendar. Even if something like Baku doesn't go ahead, then still with those remaining 3 rounds, that would give them plenty of experience, I think. But it's going to be, it's good that I think they're taking that into account, because there could have been a lot of drivers who potentially miss an opportunity just because they don't have the experience. To take those 2 Renault juniors, for example, if Renault would have taken a chance on them on any normal year, but this year thought, they haven't had the experience, we're not going to try them in the car for next year, then that could have been their career stunted. They could have missed their one shot.
I do want to make a point about Christian Lundgaard, because you know how Lando Norris, he went from F4 to Formula 1 in the space of like 4 years. He was in a different category every year, and he was like always up the front. Christian Lundgaard, he was, I think, in 2017, I think, he was champion in I think it was some Formula 4 championship. It was either the SMP or the Spanish championship. And then 2018, he was in Formula Renault. He finished, I think, second to Max Futrell. 2019 F3, he was 6th, but he was knocking on the door of being very competitive. And the only reason I think he got that ART Formula 2 seat was because I believe Renault had actually paid for that seat to race Hubert in it, and I think Hubert would have probably won the championship this year. And it's a shame what happened, obviously, and it's such a missed opportunity. I do want to add, though, even though it's a bit off topic, Hubert will actually be a selectable driver for the My Team mode in F1 2020, so you can actually grant him his F1 dream.
I saw that. Wasn't Correa in there as well?
Yes, he is.
Yeah, that was a nice touch, I think.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, that was a real. I know that Renault were really putting a lot into Hubert's career, and when they said they wanted to promote a junior driver for 2021, I think it really was with him in mind. It's a tragedy what happened to him anyway, regardless of where his career was leading. But yeah, knowing that is, it's such a real shame. And yeah,
Simon, you were going to say something?
No, I was just saying the Formula 2 calendar, if they're considering going back to these places, surely that's a clue of where Formula 1's future races might lie. If the infrastructure's been put in place to race Formula 2, it will be easy to run Formula 1 in another pit lane at the same time, the same weekend. So maybe that's a clue.
Yeah, F2 and F3 often have like a lot less members in the team as well. I went to Carlin and they often have like 6 mechanics per car, I think. And then all of those mechanics act as pit crew members as well. I mean, they all do anyway, but yeah, that's definitely going to make life a little bit easier for them.
It's the way Formula Formula One's going to cut costs, and going forward now, they've already agreed on these cost-cutting measures. They're going to have to look, the junior formulas and how they manage to run teams, because Formula One teams have got so blown up with, as the sport's grown. Again, when I first started watching Formula One in the 80s, these teams weren't as big, and there wasn't, the guy in the back of the garage who may be, the third or fourth mechanic would also be making the coffee. Now they've got, huge canteens and catering. They've got their, each person's got their own PR, whether it's a driver, a spare driver, the team principal. They've all got, there's someone standing by them, all the time, which is a great opportunity for you guys, because, although they tend to go for pretty young girls, I've got to say, you probably noticed that the PR people are generally young girls. Then maybe you could dress up. I don't know, you could rock a skirt.
No, thank you. I'll pass on that one. There is another driver who I'm quite keen on, who had a Herculean task for 2020 anyway. Any of you familiar with Yuri Vips?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, Estonian. He was the only guy last year to hold a candle to the premiers in Formula 3. And had he actually finished third in the championship, if he hadn't been overtaken in that last race, he would have had the super license points to contend for a Toro Rosso / AlphaTauri seat. But as is the case with Red Bull, because they hate Formula 2, he's now been put in Super Formula, which is where Dan Ticktum's career nearly died a slow death. And apparently for the super license points to get an AlphaTauri seat, because of the way it works, it's like a 3-year cycle. Yuri Vips, currently his super license points are, I think it's 30. So he's got 10 from winning, or 12, sorry, no, so it's 32. 12 from winning in Italian, or I think, was it Italian F4? No, if it was German F4, because they always tend to race both.
Yeah, German F4.
Yeah, and then he had 10 from finishing in fourth in FIA Formula 3 European Championship in 2018, and then 2019 fourth again in Formula 3. So he would have got 5 if he'd won Macau last year, but obviously Richard was short compared to that. But now he has to finish, I think, second in Super Formula to guarantee that he'll have super license points. And the fact is that he really has been thrown in at the deep end already, even before the COVID situation happened. Because if you look at someone like Red Bull, obviously saw Pierre Gasly do well in Super Formula and think, oh, that's obviously the place to go, because Formula Renault is no longer around, 3.5 that is. But they didn't take into account that Gasly had already been in GP2 at that point. And so they think that, well, they put Dan Ticktum in there. I don't rate Ticktum that highly. I know he's decent, but my point is that these drivers are not going to be able to be fully prepared for Formula One if they race in a series that has a lot of veterans in it. And I feel so much for Vips, and I really want him to get that Alpha Tauri seat. So yeah, again, James, thoughts on that? Vips has got such a task at hand there.
Yeah, I agree with that, because you don't get as many super license points for Super Formula as you do for something like Formula 2. Like you said, he'd have to finish second to get the same points as he would finishing 5th in Formula 2. And yeah, the Super Formula season hasn't started either yet this year. Half of its rounds are still postponed to be confirmed. The rest aren't starting until August. So he's got a lot to do in that start, and it's really not an easy championship to get into. Obviously, Red Bull like to send their junior drivers out to Super Formula so that they can get ingrained in like the Honda way of working, to prepare them for working with AlphaTauri and with Red Bull in the future. So there's a lot to adapt to in that, and a lot to adapt to in not much time at all. And it is possible. Obviously, Pierre Gasly was contending for the championship when Red Bull sent him out there. Quite well.
They had already won GP2 the year before, though, so they had an advantage.
He was coming from a different position. But yeah, and I wonder with the point of like the super license points dropping off after 3 years, I wonder if the FIA is going to put in some kind of provision that if they're if a driver's championship, if a driver's campaign for this year is scuppered by the coronavirus pandemic, whether they'll put some kind of provision in there that they can keep, say, at least some of the super license points from that would have dropped off. So Vips could perhaps keep some of his points from what would it be, 2017 or 2016, whenever they drop off from. But it's tricky because then you can't do that with everybody. And it's whether he'd be allowed to keep all of them or just some of them. But I've not heard anything yet about any kind of provision being made for that.
Yeah, and there is another thing, like Indy Lights, essentially the Formula 2 for IndyCar, that's actually been completely called off for this year. They're already struggling for entries. And there's a guy in there who I think is formidable. His name's Kyle Kirkwood. He had won F4 America, USF 2000, F3 Americas, Indy Pro, and he would have probably won Indy Lights this year. And so, yeah, their campaigns are getting scuppered. And Simon, we'll throw this over to you. The way that super license points work, obviously, being the last 3 years, James made a point there about allowing a certain a certain year from beforehand, perhaps applying or keeping the points if the COVID-19 pandemic really does scupper everyone's hopes of trying to get super license points this year. I feel like it's going to have to be inevitable, surely, because no one's going to be well prepared for this year.
Extend them, aren't they? Because you can't gain those points that you would have possibly got. So it would only be fair to not lose the points that you gained. You're right, it's an inevitability.
Yeah, there should be some kind of leniency for, like, my uni work. I didn't really do great on it, I think, but I was given some sort of exceptions because of very little details of little things that just contributed to me not being able to submit everything on time. This, surely you have, I get that the motorsport world is very cutthroat, and especially the Red Bull Junior team. I feel like Yuri's going to have a really difficult time with that if Helmut Marko is going to send him to the I don't know a metaphor. Yes, the Red Bull scrapping. Vips is a formidable driver, and I really want him to do well. And so again, with regards to all this, there surely needs to be some kind of like allowance for these drivers, like, you know, Mick Schumacher, Guan Yu Zhou, Christian Lundgaard, if they're going to be able to like keep their points for like just another year, just whilst everyone gets right back on their feet.
It makes sense with the FIA here, and you know, like any organisation, they're very political as well. Who knows what they're going to do?
So it's easy to forget that a lot of these young drivers, you know, this is their career, and a lot of them are their children or they're very young adults. Like Vips is 19, he's still a teenager, and this.
Oh, young. Because, now, Luca and I have talked about Harry Thompson in the past. You could do a whole podcast on Red Bull drivers that they've, you know, bitten and chewed and spat back out. It's bizarre levels, really, and some really talented drivers, you know. I think Harry's been taken by Sauber now, isn't he, Luca?
Yes, he's on. So basically, he and Johnny Edgar were in karting together as Red Bull Juniors. Edgar is a little bit older, and he was 15 by the start of, I think, the 2019 season. And so he got the jump up to F4, albeit he had a lot of support from his family, who were able to pay for like one of the best seats. Thompson doesn't come from immense wealth, still enough to help him go racing to an extent. However, he had to stay in karts for another year. He did KF level. I think he won, if I'm not mistaken.
Being at the right time, didn't he?
Yeah, he won the German karting championship it's not KF anymore, isn't it? It's OK, isn't it? So OK class kart. And then I think he also contended, I think, for like a European and World Championship. But it wasn't enough for Red Bull, even though he was winning. So they drop him, and now he's meant to be racing this year as part of Sauber's affiliated karting team in Gearbox KZ karts. And so it's like, I mean, Verstappen and Leclerc both did KZ. If anything, it's probably more suitable than OK karts because you've got like standing starts and shifters. But you very rarely see a lot of drivers now choose KZ's over F4. It looks like Thompson's career is he's really gonna struggle here.
He is, and he's a really talented young driver. I mean, if you've seen him race, he just has everything. He was beating Lewis Hamilton's records from what I remember across Europe in karting, but it seems to come, as ever, it comes down to money with motorsport.
Do you have a point there, James?
And with, you know, the potential that they might be missing a whole season this year, like with that question of money, the amount of money that's already been put into say a season in KZ cards, that it's, you know, if you don't get a season or you don't get a full season, or your chance of getting those points that you need to move up to the next rung of the ladder is scuppered by what's going on. That's an awful lot of money that's just gone down the drain. And for a lot of these young drivers, that might be, you know, their chance. They might not be able to make the money to have that next shot again. And I know it's something Lewis Hamilton's spoken about before, like the amount of commitment that young drivers have to put in with things like missing school to be able to go to race events. For them to put that kind of commitment and effort into it, and then have it taken away by something that's completely out of their control, and to miss their chance and, you know, be coming out, say, 15, 16, not having completed like a full education and spent all of this money on this dream that's been scuppered by a pandemic. You know, I really hope that the FIA and all the motorsport bodies around the world are going to be able to do something to help these kids.
I do have a point to raise about. Sorry, Si. I feel like I'm talking over you a lot. There's a lot of to be said about the way that we've got currently in F1 right now. There's a changing of the guard. You've got the likes of Verstappen, Leclerc, Norris, Russell, Albon, all of them lot who are coming in at such a young age, and really like taking a stranglehold on Formula One as a whole. And that's what most people are trying to, most of the teams now are trying to lead towards. Like there's a driver in Formula 3 this year. He's raced for ART. It's called Théo Pourchaire. He's 16 and now already at Formula 3. He's only had 2 years of car racing. He's won both the French Junior F4 and the German Formula 4 championships. And there is a danger now that a lot of these, like you were saying, James, at 15, 16, you've really dedicated your whole life to it for it to go down the drain. Because like, what is it? 1 in 6, maybe more drivers are the ones that get to F1. The other, however many, tend to really struggle after their shot ends to just have a normal life. Like, you know, do you remember the driver Charles Pic, who drove for Marussia and Caterham? He then did like a couple of stints in like the World Endurance Championship, and I think he made a Formula E race as well. Apparently now if I'm thinking correctly, I think he works in like a shipping yard. I might be wrong about that. And I might be thinking of someone else entirely, but he's probably one of the more fortunate ones that he's been able to find a stable income, hopefully anyway, afterwards. And there's a point to be made also. I mean, I'm not a big Latifi guy. Nicholas Latifi, who's racing for Williams this year, I don't know how old he is, but I know he's a damn sight older than the current top crop of youngsters. Are you looking it up now?
I think he's 26. I've got a feeling, but I may be
24.
24. So yeah, and his career has been extremely underwhelming. His career was like the only thing that he ever did was finish second in Formula 2 last year, and that was after like 4 or 5 seasons of it. Like if you only come in good, like the likes of Palmer and Maldonado, they were only ever really came good in GP2 when all of their peers were less experienced, and then they went on to win the championship. And look how they did in Formula 1. Well, obviously Maldonado won a race, but he was too reckless for his own good. So you do have to start wondering, because it's been like that for a while. Formula 1 really is favouring the youngsters, and if, like in the case of Harry Thompson, like I think he'll be like 15 or 16 now. The fact that he's not got a Formula 4 seat in like the British Championship or maybe even like a front running seat in the German or Italian ones, is it going to get to a point now? And I'll throw this over to you, James. We're not going to be able to let these drivers fully develop, because if they aren't good immediately, then they're going to be thrown on the scrap heap.
Yeah, I think that's such a prevalent, such a problem with motorsport these days. I think, people always talk about the Max Verstappen effect coming into F1 at 17, but I remember when Van Dorn debuted in F1 in his early 20s, and people thought that was, surprisingly old. But yeah, Lewis Hamilton debuted in his early 20s, and at the time that was ridiculously young. But yeah, there are all these drivers in that, even below Formula 3 that are approaching that sort of 18, 19 in age. And you think, almost don't want to say it, but, you wonder how they already missed the boat.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
It's ridiculous thinking that they haven't even, some of them haven't even reached legal adulthood. And you're thinking, is their career already gone?
Yeah, Simon, go on, you go say whatever you're going to say there.
And we're going to have, with all the money that's involved, you can see why Formula One looks like a very nepotistic sport. You look at, I'm not sure, I don't know much about David Schumacher. I know he's entering Formula 3 now. He seems a pretty decent driver. But there's probably, better drivers out there that can't get anywhere near that formula just because of money. You think the FIA would take a long look at themselves and say, is this point system enough? Do we need to go look at another system to give opportunities to young drivers that possibly wouldn't have that? You look at Lewis Hamilton, and Lewis Hamilton, we know he came from a very humble background, and he's probably the only guy on the grid that can legitimately say that. And look how good he is. Are we going to have on a spur? He could be. I could see him if he stays at Mercedes or a winning team. You could have the Roger Federer effect. So you'll have this old guy still capable of winning races, and then you'll have the crop of young guys chasing and really nibbling away at him. It's going to be fun. As long as it's more competitive, and I think it will be more competitive now. The changes going forward. They've delayed the change they were bringing forward to 2022, haven't they?
Yes.
Yeah. But the financial restraints will be different next year, so maybe we'll see some sort of change. I was really looking forward to those new changes, and you want to see the change in the guard. You want to see these young guys do well, but from my point of view, as an older guy, it's also good to see someone in their late 30s, maybe even early 40s, win races.
I want to just bring up a point here about Max Verstappen. So we've seen a lot of the drivers I mentioned there. Leclerc, he had 4 years of car racing. Norris had 4 as well. Russell and Albon had a bit more. Verstappen had 1. He had 1 year of car racing between karting and Formula One. He raced in European F3 2014, finished 3rd in that with 10 wins, more than the champion, who was Esteban Ocon. But he got the F1 nod because I'm glad that a lot of us were wrong, but I'm worried that perhaps what you mentioned earlier, James, that is really going to open the floodgates for people to really gamble on, especially with Renault now. Now that they've lost their star driver, obviously not a pleasant thing to say. But I'm worried, when I was mentioning earlier about Christian Lundgaard and to an extent Guan Yu Zhou, who's only really came good in Formula 2 last year. He was very underwhelming in FIA European F3. They're really in a bit of a pickle now because their drivers, especially now with the COVID situation, possibly compromising their seasons, and Daniel Ricciardo got buggering off to McLaren next year. They're really in a bit of a tough spot in regards to who they're going to be able to select for the 2021 drive.
Yeah, I think the Renault seat is going to be one of the most interesting ones, and they are in a real dilemma because they've got there's been rumours they're talking to Valtteri Bottas for next year. People are always obviously talking about Fernando Alonso, even though I don't give those rumours much credit. But Yeah, they're in a position where they're losing their star driver, and although they've got Esteban Ocon, who's had 2 years in F1, he's going to have 3 years under his belt by the end of next year. I wouldn't say he's ready to be a team leader in the way that Ricardo was.
Who left their phone on?
It wasn't me. So they've got that tricky position where they've got to try and find. They've obviously got quite a few issues with that team, and they're trying to build it back up. So they need someone with that ability, someone like Ricardo brought, and like someone like Bottas could bring. But at the same time, Renault's losing a lot of money this year, and they've had to cut so many jobs this year because of the pandemic. So they can't really justify spending the megabucks for someone like Sebastian Vettel, bringing him into the team. So they're in this tricky position where they've got to weigh up, do we want to justify spending money trying to pull someone like Bottas away from Mercedes, or pull someone else out of their contract somewhere else on the grid, or take a punt on one of these young drivers? And it's sort of a catch-22, because if they don't take a chance on someone like Guan Yu Zhou or Christian Lundgaard, then it kind of invalidates their junior academy and all the money that they've invested into those drivers' careers. But equally, if they give them a chance and they're not ready for Formula One, that's kind of a year wasted for them when they've already had so many years, stalling on their way up the grid.
Did anyone mention George Russell for the Renault seat?
No.
He's still locked into a contract with Williams, I think, for next year.
I'm hearing that Daimler have said that they will commit to Formula One for a few more years if the Mercedes, the team, sign Vettel, and Toto Wolff is at odds with them, saying that he wants to put Russell in the seat.
Yeah, I think Russell promised the seat, hasn't he? But Vettel in a Mercedes is the dream ticket.
They did want him originally, but
I think it's controversial opinion, but I think Vettel can manipulate a team. Much like Prost back in his day. Not in a bad way. Just he can be that political animal if needed. I think he tried that. He's been trying to do that at Ferrari, and he's realised he's the older man now, and Charles is more in favour. And I think him leaving is because he probably couldn't get that number one status going forward.
Yeah,
I think you're right there about Vettel. The effect that he has on a team, and when he was at Red Bull, he liked having that environment that he'd moulded around himself. And I think he tried to do that at Ferrari, but it just didn't work. Like Schumacher was able to do it at Ferrari because him, John Todd, and Ross Brawn were able to have this close-knit unit together, and they said, we'll make decisions together and resist pressure from upper Ferrari management. But when Vettel came into Ferrari, they had people like Arriva Beni and now Mattia Binotto, who were taking their orders from the higher Ferrari management, like Sergio Marchionne and Louis Camilleri. So Vettel's not been able to kind of create that same partnership with the team principal that Schumacher was. And he just wouldn't be able to do that in Mercedes while Hamilton's there.
Especially, yeah.
Ferrari can't. They went such a long barren spell since to Schumacher. And it was only when they brought people that weren't Italian into the team, that weren't as passionate, who could stand away and say, no, we need to do this. We need to build. You can't go 200 miles an hour all the way from A to B. You've got to take these little steps and build. That they actually built a winning team and were able to win. And I think until they admit that and go after someone and build a team from behind, they won't win a championship.
Yeah, well, Ferrari, I think they really want to show that because Leclerc is actually their first ever Ferrari Academy driver to join the main team. And they really want to show that investment was worth it. But then also, Vettel, when he was, rising to the number one position at Red Bull during the time that their ascendancy to starting to win races and championships, we obviously saw him being the very conniving, I don't want to say bratty, because it looks like I'm really having a go at him. But let's just say that
what every racing driver every sportsman at the top of the game has that about them. Lewis has it.
The champion mentality.
Yeah, it's Vettel had that at Red Bull, and then the second that a young gun came along and did to him, in the case of Ricciardo, did to him what he did to Webber, he buggers off to Ferrari thinking that he can. And he was given leniency with the fact that Kimi was his teammate, and Kimi didn't give to what word I'm looking for. He didn't care about the fact that Vettel was him, and as long as Kimi got paid. And the fact is that Hamilton and Vettel had a Finnish teammate who wouldn't contend with them. Hamilton proved that it was warranted. Vettel, he just kept spinning around like he was on an office chair. And so they brought in Leclerc, young, fresh blood, to maybe rejuvenate Vettel, but he bottles it again. And I don't, it's such an anomaly, honestly, with Vettel. It's kind of infuriating as to why he is the way he is. Why he won 4 championships, and now he's just a shell of his former self. And it's very frustrating, even for me, as someone who isn't a huge fan of Vettel. It's just perplexing.
Yeah, I mean, he's genuinely, from what I've seen, seems a genuinely nice guy outside of the car. He's got a good sense of humour, all that naming of the car business, and was it Dirty Die or some Dirty something? But you might go. I mean, Renault and Mercedes and Daimler are really closely tied. I mean, they share a lot of parts on their road cars, and their gearboxes and things. Most manufacturers do share a lot of stuff now. So there is some, obviously, with Ocon going to Renault, there is a relationship there. So Vettel will go to Renault for a year and then jump ship and go to Mercedes if Lewis decides to go with. I can't. Can you see Lewis driving for anyone else?
No. The only one I can actually think of him going to is probably Aston, but even then, that is still a gamble. That would be like Alonso going to McLaren Honda, and obviously we know how that turned out.
I'd love to see him drive a Williams. I'd love to see him go to Williams and pull him up the bootstrap, but unfortunately, that's not going to happen either.
Gentlemen, I am going to have to probably end the episode here. It's been a very informative conversation. We started talking about the calendar restructuring and how motorsport will get going again, and we just end up talking badly about Vettel. So I don't know how that happened. So, shall I end this episode off here?
That's going to take some editing. Good luck, Aaron.
Yeah, good luck, Aaron. I'll have to send you. Yeah. Anyway, let's end it here. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening to this installment of the PitCast. Now, if we want to give out our social media handles, James?
I'm at James16Matthews on Twitter and Instagram.
Okay. Simon?
I'm the F1 Taxi.
The F1 Taxi, right. And I am the Luca Format. So, thank you